The fact that we have a break means just that. We have a break. Because what we have is the very strong evidence triangulated with two living day relatives with the mitochondrial DNA.
For generations, history books have told a simple story. Abraham Lincoln was born in Kentucky, and that was the end of it. But history isn't always as complete as it seems. What if one of the most iconic figures in American history carried a secret, one so deeply buried that it took modern science to uncover it? In 2015, researchers set out to solve a long-standing mystery surrounding his mother, Nancy Hanks Lincoln. What they found didn't just answer old questions, it raised new ones that challenge everything we thought we knew about Lincoln's origins. Because sometimes the truth isn't lost, it's hidden. And if you're into uncovering hidden truths like this, make sure to hit subscribe, because what comes next might completely change how you see history. If you were born outside of marriage in early America, the consequences followed you for life. The law labeled such children filius nullius, meaning child of no one. That meant no legal father, no guaranteed inheritance, and no rightful claim to a family name. Society didn't just judge, it branded. Women who had children out of wedlock faced public shame, heavy fines, and sometimes even imprisonment. Families often buried these secrets, raising children under false identities just to avoid scandal. And in the world of politics, a rumor like that could destroy a future before it even began. Abraham Lincoln knew exactly how dangerous such a truth could be. Around 1850, while traveling to court in Illinois with his law partner William H. Herndon, he reportedly shared something deeply personal, something he asked to be kept secret during his lifetime. According to Herndon, Lincoln quietly admitted that his mother, Nancy Hanks Lincoln, had been born outside of marriage, possibly the daughter of a Virginia nobleman whose identity was never officially recorded. It's a striking thought. The man who would go on to lead a divided nation believed his own origins were tied to a hidden past. Yet even after revealing that secret, Lincoln spoke with deep respect and emotion. He credited his mother for everything he had become, saying that all he was, or ever hoped to be, came from her. That moment reveals not just a secret, but the character of the man behind it. Herndon kept that confession private while Lincoln lived. But after Lincoln's assassination, the story began to surface. It didn't take long for it to spark controversy. In 1889, William H. Herndon published a detailed account of Lincoln's life, filled with interviews, letters, and first-hand recollections. He knew the revelations would shock people and challenge the almost legendary image of Lincoln. But his goal wasn't to protect a myth, it was to present the real person, flaws and all. The reaction was immediate and intense. Lincoln's family, especially his son Robert Todd Lincoln, strongly rejected these claims. Supporters accused Herndon of dishonesty and of trying to damage Lincoln's legacy. But then, new evidence began to emerge, evidence that was much harder to dismiss. In a courthouse archive in Mercer County, researchers discovered a record from November 24, 1789. It showed that a woman named Lucy Hanks had been charged with fornication, a term commonly used at the time when an unmarried woman had given birth. Such a charge could lead to serious punishment, including fines, public humiliation, or even jail time. The timeline raised important questions. Nancy Hanks Lincoln was born before Lucy later married Henry Sparrow in 1790. Shortly after that marriage, the case against Lucy was dropped, which was not unusual for that period. Since children born outside of marriage typically carried their mother's surname, it explained why Nancy retained the name Hanks. For decades, historians debated what all of this meant. Some believed it confirmed that Nancy had been born illegitimate, while others argued the records were incomplete or misinterpreted. Frontier documentation was often messy, and without clear proof, the debate continued for generations. That uncertainty remained for more than 150 years, until science offered a new approach. By 2015, researchers decided to revisit the mystery using DNA rather than historical records alone. Among them were genealogists like Richard Hillman, who had spent years studying the Hanks family. But this time, they had access to advanced genetic testing methods that earlier historians could only imagine. They focused on mitochondrial DNA, which is passed down exclusively through the maternal line. Because it changes very little over generations, it allows researchers to trace ancestry through an unbroken line of mothers and daughters. The challenge, however, was that Lincoln himself had no living descendants. His direct bloodline ended in 1985. To work around this, researchers traced the maternal relatives of Nancy Hanks Lincoln, identifying living descendants connected through that same maternal line. They divided participants into two groups, one linked to the Hanks family and another connected to the Shipley family, which some historians believed could be her true lineage. When the results came back in October 2015, they were clear and decisive. The Hanks group shared identical mitochondrial DNA belonging to a rare genetic type known as X1C, while the Shipley group showed no connection at all. The conclusion was unmistakable. The Hanks lineage was correct, and the alternative theory did not hold up. After more than a century of debate, science had provided an answer. The evidence strongly supported the idea that Nancy Hanks Lincoln had indeed been born outside of marriage, just as Lincoln himself had once quietly suggested. But the DNA revealed something even more surprising. That rare genetic marker, X1C, hinted at a much deeper and unexpected ancestry, one that reached far beyond early American history and into a past no one had seriously considered before. For context, one of the most common maternal DNA groups in Europe, haplogroup H, accounts for nearly half of the population. But X1C is something else entirely. It's exceptionally rare, especially in families long believed to come purely from British colonial roots. To understand why that matters, you need to know how mitochondrial DNA works. It passes from mother to child and remains largely unchanged over generations. Scientists use tiny variations in this DNA, known as haplogroups, to trace ancient human migration. These markers act like a genetic map, showing where maternal lines traveled thousands of years ago. Haplogroup X itself split into two major branches during the last ice age. One branch, X2, spread widely across Europe and even appears in some Native American populations. The other branch, X1, followed a very different path, showing up primarily in North Africa and parts of the Near East. Today, some of its highest concentrations are found among Druze communities in regions like Israel, Lebanon, and Syria. X1C is one of the rarest sub-branches within that already uncommon lineage. So, what does this mean for Abraham Lincoln and his mother, Nancy Hanks Lincoln? It doesn't identify Nancy's father, and it doesn't answer every question. But it does reveal something important. Lincoln's maternal ancestry was not a simple, purely English colonial line, as many once believed. Somewhere far back in history, hundreds or even thousands of years ago, that lineage connects to regions few would associate with early American settlers. It's a reminder that the idea of pure ancestry was always more myth than reality, and for generations, That myth was used to judge and stigmatize people like Nancy Hanks. In that sense, the DNA didn't just resolve a historical debate, it quietly challenged a long-standing illusion. Now, stepping away from genetics and court records, it's important to look at Nancy herself, not as a controversy, but as a person. Nancy Hanks Lincoln was born around 1784 in what was then Hampshire County, an area that is now part of West Virginia. Historians later identified a likely birthplace there, and in 2009, she was even formally recognized during the bicentennial of her son's birth. But her early life unfolded on the rough American frontier, far from the structured record-keeping of cities like Boston or Philadelphia. Families moved frequently, churches were scarce, and official documents were often incomplete or missing. As a result, there is no definitive birth record for Nancy and no document clearly naming both of her parents. What we know comes from scattered legal records, census fragments, and accounts gathered years later. Her childhood was unstable from the beginning. She was raised by her grandparents, and after her grandfather's death, she went to live with her aunt and uncle, Elizabeth and Thomas Sparrow. During that time, she was even known as Nancy Sparrow, which later added confusion to her identity. She also grew up alongside her cousin, Dennis Hanks, who, like her, had been born outside of marriage. In that family, such circumstances were not uncommon, but they were rarely discussed openly. Despite these challenges, Nancy earned a reputation for her character and strength. Those who knew her described her as intelligent, kind, deeply religious, and capable. She learned to read, something not all frontier women could do, and developed practical skills like sewing and household management. She worked for neighboring families and gained their respect. In 1806, she married Thomas Lincoln, and together they had 3 children, Sarah, Abraham Lincoln, and a younger son who died in infancy. But tragedy soon followed. In 1818, while living in Indiana, a mysterious illness spread through their community, what we now know as milk sickness, caused by cows consuming the toxic white snake root plant. At the time, no one understood its cause. Nancy's aunt and uncle died first, and not long after, she became ill herself. She was just 34 years old when she died. Lincoln was only 9. He and his father built her coffin by hand and buried her near their home. Years later, Lincoln would reflect on her influence, saying that everything he was, or ever hoped to be, he owed to her. To him, she was not a scandal or a question mark in history, but the foundation of his life. Whatever secrets surrounded her birth, he carried them quietly, with respect rather than shame. So what is the most unsettling part of this story? It's not the rare X1C genetic marker that simply reflects ancient human migration and the complexity of ancestry. The deeper issue lies in what this history reveals about society at the time. In the late 1700s, Lucy Hanks was a young woman on the Virginia frontier who became pregnant before marriage. We don't know the circumstances behind it. What we do know is how society reacted. She faced legal charges, public judgment, and the possibility of punishment. Her reputation would have been permanently damaged. When Nancy Hanks Lincoln was born, that stigma didn't disappear. She carried her mother's surname, a quiet but visible sign of her status. Under the law, children in her position had fewer rights and were labeled as having no legal father. And yet from that beginning came Abraham Lincoln, a man who would rise from the frontier to lead the United States through its greatest crisis, preserve the Union, and abolish slavery. But he did so while carrying a deeply personal truth. Had his political opponents been able to prove that his mother was born outside of marriage, they likely would have used it against him. In the 19th century, such accusations were powerful enough to destroy reputations. Lincoln understood that risk, which is why he reportedly asked William H. Herndon to keep the matter private during his lifetime. The DNA research conducted in 2015 didn't expose scandal. It confirmed something far more human. It showed that Lincoln carried a quiet truth about his family, one shaped by the harsh social rules of his time. And in doing so, it forces us to confront a larger reality. The judgment faced by women like Lucy Hanks, the labels placed on children like Nancy, and the pressure to hide such truths were not minor social customs. They shaped lives, identities, and histories. In this case, they became part of the story of one of America's most important leaders. In the end, the DNA evidence confirmed a central conclusion. Nancy Hanks Lincoln was almost certainly the daughter of Lucy Hanks, born outside of marriage. The long-debated Shipley theory, claiming that Nancy Hanks Lincoln was born within a recognized marriage, doesn't hold up against genetic evidence. When researchers examined mitochondrial DNA passed through the female line of Lucy Hanks, it consistently matched living descendants connected to Nancy's maternal line. The alternative lineage showed no connection at all. The testing also revealed something unexpected: a rare mitochondrial haplogroup known as X1C. This genetic signature is most commonly found in regions of North Africa and the Near East, reflecting ancient migration patterns that stretch back thousands of years. It doesn't point to a recent scandal or a hidden relationship in the 1700s. What it does challenge, however, is the long-held belief that early colonial American families came from purely British or Northern European maternal lines. The genetic record tells a more complex story, one shaped by centuries of movement, mixing, and human migration. At the same time, the DNA does not answer every question. The identity of Nancy's father remains unknown. No surviving document from the late 18th century clearly names him, and the historical records are simply too limited to provide a definitive answer. It's very likely that this detail will remain a mystery, but the significance of these findings goes far beyond genetics. In late 18th century Virginia and Kentucky, women who became pregnant outside of marriage faced serious consequences: legal charges, financial penalties, and public humiliation. Children born under those circumstances carried lasting social stigma. Nancy Hanks Lincoln grew up within that reality. Raised by relatives and carrying her mother's surname, her life reflected the legal norms of the time under English common law. From those beginnings came her son, Abraham Lincoln. Raised in poverty on the frontier, he received less than 2 years of formal education. His father, Thomas Lincoln, was largely self-taught and struggled to provide financial stability. The family moved repeatedly across Kentucky, Indiana, and Illinois in search of better opportunities. Despite those challenges, Lincoln rose to lead the nation during its most difficult moment. As president during the Civil War, he preserved the Union, issued the Emancipation Proclamation, and helped redefine the moral direction of the United States. His words and ideas continue to shape American political thought to this day. Lincoln was also aware of the circumstances surrounding his mother's birth. According to accounts from his law partner, William H. Herndon, he believed that many of his strongest qualities came from her. Whether that belief can ever be measured scientifically doesn't really matter. What matters is that he believed it and carried that belief with pride. The DNA research conducted in 2015 didn't rewrite Lincoln's story. It clarified it. It confirmed a long-disputed question about Nancy Hanks Lincoln and demonstrated that the idea of completely pure colonial ancestry doesn't stand up to modern science. Human history has always been more interconnected than we often imagine. Nancy Hanks was born around 1784 to a woman who faced legal consequences for her pregnancy. She was raised by extended family on the frontier, built a life under difficult conditions, and died young after raising her children in a one-room cabin. Her son would go on to lead a nation through crisis and change the course of history. When modern DNA testing confirmed the maternal line Lincoln had quietly acknowledged, it didn't diminish his legacy. It reinforced the reality behind it. It showed that social stigma does not define a person's future, and that even the most complicated beginnings can lead to extraordinary outcomes. As Lincoln once said, "All that I am or ever hope to be, I owe to her." The science now helps us better understand who she was and confirms the truth of her story. And if you found this story as powerful as it is revealing, make sure to subscribe, because there are many more hidden histories waiting to be uncovered.